Larry Swafford, United States Navy retired. Judge, commissioners, sir, I want to thank you first and foremost for your service and being here today, because without you we couldn't have this forum. My question to you, although this operation is supposed to be benign, and I have assurance from several other sources that it is, as you mentioned, there would only be two Humvees. Imagine they're up armored 12,100 pound Humvees. As they move through our roads, will you be able to reimburse, fix any roadways? As to also mention, any of your personnel going through our town, often there is mayhem, as you will, sometimes just out in town drinking.
I think we
Will that happen?
I think we understand your question. Let's go ahead and get an answer to that question about what is the weight of a Humvee and how much damage is it likely to do to our roads?
Generally, the low-end Humvees are 1 and 1/4 ton Humvees. If they are armored, they do scale upward. That would be something that we take into consideration. But within the memorandum of agreement, memorandum of understanding, that is spelled out for any damages within that document.
We know the heaviest piece of equipment or any construction site is the water truck. How big is a water buffalo?
500 gallons, 8 pounds per gallon. So
That's manageable. Okay, let me go to a question from a card, and then we'll have another question from this audience. And we have very many very good questions. The question here has to do with why is this focused in the South? Why 3 months? I think you kind of answered the focus area because you created a foreign country for this training. Why the location and timing on this?
Well, the timing itself basically has to do with the rotation of forces. As I've said, after 14 years of combat, we're still engaged in combat. We have a heavy op-tempo as it is. So it comes to the availability of the units. We've had some units have to back out because of real-world missions. So that's where the timing comes into play. This was the best time possible to conduct the exercise. And again, it comes to challenging terrain and exposing our guys to different environments. And we've seen that. The long distances offered here in Texas are exactly what we're looking for to push our guys to the limits.
Thank you. Let me recognize first Deborah Jones for a question from the floor, and then secondly the gentleman to my right over here. Thank you for being respectful, Debbie.
Are you going to actively include the local police and sheriff departments in your activities? I'm hearing that you're going to be gaining information, and what kind of information, and are you going to use our local people to help with that?
So we're not training any type of law enforcement during this training exercise. It's not happening. The only coordination now that will take place is we're just letting them know, hey, here's what happened the last 24 hours, here's what's happening next 24 hours. So they can maintain situational awareness and just make sure that we're living up to the memorandum of agreement, memorandum of understanding that has occurred with the municipality.
Very good question, Debbie. A written question from downstairs. Why was Bastrop County picked out of all the counties in Texas, and how will it affect the routine daily lives of our citizens?
So how counties were picked in Texas comes down to this. The land was volunteered by the private landowner. They came to us. Okay? They are not getting any reimbursement for volunteering their land. They believe in training America's Special Operations Forces, not only in word but also in deed. And that's how these counties were picked. From there, we come to the governing body and we seek a dual concurrence. Again, it's a private landowner volunteering their private land for our use.
Thank you. Like the gentleman here in the jacket.
Oh, sir. Your Honor, goes
The second question.
Yeah, how will
it affect our routine daily lives?
First and foremost, we're truly invested in everybody's personal rights and their privacy. That's what we live for. We live to support the Constitution of the United States, and that's what everybody wants to live by. and that's what we're here to do. So privacy, personal rights, top priority. We're not going to interfere with those. We're not going to interfere with people's livelihoods or negatively impact their commerce. So some of the counties that we're in, they're very concerned we're going to disrupt recreational activities. It's not going to happen. So any type of farming that takes place here, any type of other commerce where there's to be an impact by having 2 Humvees come through, we'll take that all into consideration and work it out with the governing body.
Question?
Judge, in light of the people's, my name is Jim Dillon.
Thank you, Jim.
In light of the people's overwhelming opposition to this martial law program, would the Commissioners Court consider reversing their invitation to these guys? And would the court be offended if I told the Colonel that I didn't believe a single word that he just said?
Your question, the answer is the agenda item today is for discussion of this program. There's no action on the agenda for this program, and it's in the age in which we live, there is a considerable amount of distrust of all government at whatever level, and the reason we're holding this special meeting is to answer questions so that you, as the citizens of Bastrop County and America, can feel better about this special program. I have a written question from downstairs, and then we'll get to another one from here. Will any part of this exercise be martial law? And is anybody getting paid, including the police or any elected officials?
Okay, the first part of the question, Your Honor, no, it has nothing to do with martial law, period. We are Title 10 forces, not Title 32, nothing like that. No martial law in any way, shape, or form. We basically simply want to train the United States Special Operations Forces for future operations overseas. That's it. That's where we operate daily. Even right now, while we're all standing here, there are guys putting everything they've got into it against an enemy that is very determined to rid us off of this planet.
And what's anybody getting paid?
No, no one's getting paid, Your Honor. They volunteered the land, and no one in the municipality, no one in the law enforcement either.
All right.
Ron, would you explain Title 10, Title 32, and those Army National?
They are the Army National Guard, Title 10 forces, or your active duty forces.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question here. Please say your name.
My name is Keith Elford. I don't know if you recognize me, but we get up here, so I don't know if you recognize me, but I do recognize you.
This is not personal.
I got
Just ask your question.
One of my questions is, well, first of all, you saw Commander General Cleveland, and you saw Commander Darcy Rogers, and I've got a statement on that. I'll say that real quick. But one of my questions is, can I have answered it? On property damage, who's going to be our point of contact in this community? If fences are broke, gates left open, cattle, horses get out, who's going to be the point of contact that these people go to file that claim?
That comes back up here to the County Courts Commission, because that's who the memorandum of agreement, memorandum of understanding is with.
Okay. Now, my statement is, I've been a Green Beret for the last 26 years with 10 Special Forces. I do know the USAC commander and the USAC commander very well. 3-star Charles Cleveland and a 2-star Darcy Rogers. And I'm here to tell you, from my experience in combat with them, these two men cannot be trusted. When they tell you something, you take it with a grain of salt. And when you go back to Fort Bragg and you do your debrief, you let Charles Cleveland know, my name is Keith Helper. He'll remember because he knows exactly what he did and he knows I know. And I will do everything in my power to let this community know these two men cannot be trusted.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. The gentleman in the t-shirt with the white writing on the front, but I have a question here from, if you'll get the microphone, and then it'll be next. I have a question from downstairs. Explain the title Jade Helm 15 logo. What does that mean?
The logo?
What is Jade Helm 15? Is it an acronym? Is it
No, it is not an acronym.
code words?
Right. Yeah, there's no code words with it. Somebody made an acronym for it. They were very creative in their thought process on alternative media to come up with that. Very creative indeed. Bottom line, This is a joint DoD recognized exercise. So any training exercise that is recognized at the DoD Pentagon level has to have a training exercise name associated with it. Jade Helm has no special significance whatsoever, period. Much like any other training exercise or operation, you name them as a point of reference. So that way when somebody comes into my office and starts talking about Jade Helm, I know exactly what they're talking about. It's an index.
The follow-up question there is, what about that strange image in the center where the sword and arrows cross? You bring that up.
Okay, so the arrows, the crossed arrows, as some people out here are from the Special Forces community, that is the branch insignia for Special Forces. The dagger going back through there is the commando dagger from World War II. The clog in there is a Danish clog that goes back to World War II up in Holland, Norway, and the like during the occupied days. People who were in the resistance threw their sabots, their shoes, into machinery, and the machinery would break. Hence, sabotage came from that activity. And that's one of the things that Special Forces do in an unconventional warfare environment with the people that they're trying to link up with. So it's traced back to those kinds of things.
Okay, one more thing on the logo. Who made up the subtitle Master of the Human Domain, and what does that mean?
So Master of the Human Domain is a construct that we operate in. It's actually the human domain. It's recognized at the Army level, and what that is there's no longer a linear battlefield after 14 years. So if you think that there's going to be another great war where it's the Allies against the Axis, or even the American-led efforts against the North Koreans and the Chinese, that's just not how warfare is conducted anymore. It's asymmetric in nature. And what is at the root or vied for by the enemy is the human populace. You have a gentleman in the Middle East, we'll call him Abdullah Khalid. Okay, so Abdullah Khalid is able to provide you food when you can't get food. He's able to get you clean water when you can't get clean water. He's able to start up a school in your local community. And then one day, Abdullah Khalid comes to you and says, hey, would you mind hiding this anti-aircraft missile for me? He's never asked that population for anything before, but he has only provided. He has worked the human domain. They take the anti-aircraft missile and they hide it for him. It is population centers. How do we counter his credibility, his influence that he has when we come in and we move into an area for 3 days, 4 days at a time? How can you instantly pick that apart and figure it out? That is the human domain that we operate.
I appreciate that explanation. Very well done. And our next question from the floor.
Yeah, I'm Staff Sergeant Joe Biggs, U.S. Army, retired, Infowars.com, and I have a question. You said your training will be to blend in for overseas combat missions. So I'm kind of curious how these special operations guys who look like us, look like him, are going to be practicing blending in when we all look the same. Don't they need to train in an area overseas for the combat they're going to go to? Because that, quite frankly, doesn't make sense to me from my time in the military, because you guys have Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia, the Asymmetric Warfare Center, that has a school, a soccer field, a subway station, a bank, all that, and you're training on these environments, which look like here. That's why people are concerned.
Excellent question.
So with that, realistic military training occurs off of the federal installation out in the local area. That's what we're doing. As far as blending in, yeah, you take a guy from Fayetteville, North Carolina, I dress differently than people dress here. It's regional. It's one of those.
I've been at Fort Bragg. I was there for 7 years.
You may not like the answer, but that is how it is. And you may have been at Fort Bragg, and people dress differently in and around the 10 surrounding counties, and you've seen it. In the 10 surrounding counties, people dress differently, and you've seen how soldiers dress. And you can snicker about it all you want.
Okay.
That is the truth.
Okay, that's fine.
You'll come back to this side of the room.
Are we going to blend in?
So this question from downstairs asks about private property.
So we gonna have a run
Are
on
any
public
activities
t-shirts?
taking place on private property against the owner's wishes or permission?
Simple answer is no. They volunteered the land. We've worked everything out with them, explained the concept of the training, and they agreed to it. There's also memorandum of agreement, memorandum of understanding.
So there's no scenario in which a couple of your guys are going to be running through grandma's backyard in downtown Smithfield in the middle of the night.
Correct. There's no scenario like that.
If you see something like that, call 911 immediately.
It has nothing to do with us.
All right, thanks. Second question. The instruction is to speak into the microphone, but don't hold it too close because it rattles. But in order for the Skype camera to pick it up and take it downstairs and hear your question. So tell us your name and ask your question.
My name is Mindy Stroge. I'm the Assistant Chief at Hardin Pines Volunteer Fire Department. And for those of you who don't know the area, it's between Smithfield and Bastrop. We have concern, certain of us have concern. We are very independent people out there, and we have a large faction that do not trust the government. We've had a lot of people contact us as individuals in the department, even though we know nothing, asking for more information. A, is there anywhere that they can go, because they will not come here in a public forum. B, just to ask a question, just to find out information. B, will there be a map available to the public to kind of ease their concerns? And at any point, if something goes wrong, will the departments, there's 9 departments in the county, will we at least be made aware of so that we can prepare, so that we make sure, okay, well, maybe this weekend we shouldn't go off. Maybe we should stay around for this weekend.
Right, so I think there's 3 points to your question there. Let me reverse that. The conduit for information comes back to the county here, who will be touching base with, going over the last 24, next 24. Everyone who's involved with the exercise has comms on them, communications on them, to make certain that we're talking, and if an emergency occurs, we're dialing in right then and there. Okay, and then the map, okay. So the land is private. If the landowner chooses to disclose who he is or she is and where it's taking place at, that's up to them. We value their privacy just like everybody else values their own privacy. That is their own personal decision to volunteer their private land to do so. So that is up to them. It's not up to me to make their private business public. And there was a third point earlier on.
Risk management assessment is what I was really concerned about. I understand risk management assessment, we do it all the time. I don't think, there's such a high density. There are backyard conspiracy theorist meetings at every moment. And I am very concerned. My father and my sister, they were both coming up with, I'm concerned about the soldiers.
And that's why this training is taking place on private property.
There will be no overlap though on the other property.
There will be transport from one place to another on roads. From one place of private property to another place of private property.
Like,
Where's the Bloomingdale?
No, not Bastrop State Park.
All right,
Private property.
Thank you. From downstairs, this question, is it correct the exercise is initiated under the jurisdiction of the Department of Homeland Security?
No.
And I'll just ask this the way it's written. When we have a federal government that cannot tell the truth, how do we know that what you're saying is true?
Shut it down.
Just ask everybody not to mix apples and pumpkins. Okay, let's do it that way. This institution right here has been around for over 240 years. I've transitioned in this uniform, various shades of it, under 5 presidents, all of it peacefully. You may have issues with the federal government. You may have issues with the administration. So be it. Okay? But this institution right here has been with you for over 240 years, period.
the red blouse. State your name, please.
I'm sorry. My name is Sandy Churchill, and I live in Roseanne. You stated that the FBI and DHS is involved.
Not DHS, no.
And other agencies.
The State Department.
Right. Is FEMA going to be involved?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Judge,
Yes.
this goes back to,
Do you want a point of order, or what are you asking?
I want to, may I have the microphone, please?
Let's not do
I have a
that.
question that wasn't answered.
Lots of people have questions.
Ask the question.
Does America do it?
He only mentioned 2 Humvees. Out of all these members of the military that are going to be here,
Please be
how are they
seated,
going
sir.
to?
Please be seated.
One helicopter.
We're not gonna do that. We will take it decently and in order. Raise your hand, and I'll get to you as soon as we can. Mr. Hanna has his hand up. If you get the mic from him, I'll read a question from downstairs. If a private citizen is asked to participate and refuse, what will Jade Helm's response be?
Then we don't participate with that private citizen, and the agreements have already been reached.
Okay, so there will
And
be,
they can still back out, they can still do what they want to participate, and that's fine.
but as part of the exercise, you're saying that there'll not be any interaction between any of the military personnel who will be in the county and private citizens on the street or in a restaurant or...
For exercise purposes, Your Honor, no. For the matter of going and getting a cheeseburger or a nice cold Coke, yes. The kids are going to want a can of Copenhagen. They may want a pack of Marlboros, they may want a can of Coke.
All right, good, that's fine. Mr. Hanna?
I'm Darwin Hanna from Cedar Creek. Brought my favorite book with me, this Hunter Ridge Dictionary. And my question is, I want you to address receiving this and cutting it out and not bring it back by any other name that your strategist may find in this dictionary that has anything to say that it is a preparation for martial law.
Yes, because it is not a preparation for martial law, sir.
That's what you say.
Thank you, thank you for that succinct answer. The gentleman in the black shirt with the glass sunglasses, I kind of wish you'd remove your sunglasses, it's not that bright in there. Do you have a vision problem? All right. Get the mic to him, meanwhile I'll ask a couple questions. You've answered some of these already, so I'll try to weed them out. Are there any activities of this training exercise to which the public will be subjected?
No,
All right. Will soldiers enter anyone's home without their consent?
no,
Will a military commander confiscate or take our food, water, fuel, or other belongings without their consent?
no.
All right, your question, sir.
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Bobby Joe Wells, Precinct 2009, Bastrop County. Colonel, you said that this is a training military exercise, and this training entails unconventional warfare, which is guerrilla warfare training, which includes PSYOPs, psychological operations, which is a weapon. Psychological warfare is a weapon. And it appears that these PSYOPs are taking place right now. And psychological operations, being psychological warfare, that would be a weapon being used against citizens if you're talking about blending in, obtaining information, and all that sort of stuff. How do you respond to that, sir?
One, there's not a PSYOP campaign going on associated with that. This is an information brief, and that has nothing to do with the private citizens in Bastrop County. So I wish you'd clarify the question, because it sounded more like a statement in the end.
The question is psychological, psychological operations, is it considered psychological warfare? Is it considered weaponry in your Army training?
No, it's an operation. It's a line of operation, or correction, a line of effort at that point, not an operation. It's just the way that the effects are masked differently. So I'm not going to get into this.
Okay, well, I'm talking about intelligence gathering, on citizens.
That's not going to occur with this training exercise.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm glad that we got to that question. Others asked that how much intelligence gathering will take place voice from the public or from the private sector? And the answer is
None.
None. Thank you. Mr. Kiefer, if you'll move back to this side of the room, there's several who have their hands up. The lady sitting on the end of the second row, I'd like to go to her next. While you're moving that way, from downstairs, how was becoming familiar with Texas and the domestic U.S. terrain benefit your soldiers in foreign training?
It's the ruggedness of the terrain and it's the long distance associated with it. These guys, they're going to move, and we're going to move them on highways and things of that nature. We're going to get them from point A to point B, but they have to work with the role players in order to say the right things to make that all possible. So long distances occur. If you start looking at a country like, say, Afghanistan, and how it measures up to Texas, Texas is 10% larger than Afghanistan. And the special operations and how they operate over in Afghanistan, from one corner, east to west, north to south as well, they're all over and they have to move around quite a bit. And to synchronize operations like that takes a considerable amount of effort. This is an operational level training exercise. And it's to really get to the heart of the matter is how can we communicate with our guys out there in very remote places.
Good. Mr. Clinton, state your name, please.
Hi, my name is Mary Halls. I'm with Raging Elephants Radio. I come out of Houston. But I just want to clarify, you said that private landowners came to you to offer to volunteer their land. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then you have memorandums of understanding.
And agreement, yes.
And agreement. And so then now you have also that MOA with the county, is that correct?
That's part of the R&T process that I described earlier.
Okay. But what I'm curious about is how long has this agreement been in place before the citizens have known, and you know, what kind of arrangements have been made before everyone else here has known about that?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes, you may.
Ma'am, we did that in accordance with Texas law as part of having items. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Ma'am, we did that in accordance with Texas law. Anytime something's brought before a municipal body or a county courts commission, X amount of days, it has to be posted in advance. So with that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Your Honor, I'm a resident of North Carolina and Pennsylvania. I believe it's 3 working days. It has to be published beforehand, and it was.
Published for this agenda today
And previous.
and previously before the agreement was signed?
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
correct?
Correct.
Okay, I'm just asking
Yep.
to clarify.
Sunshine, I'm all about it. But where?
These gentlemen first came.
Don't look hand though.
These gentlemen first came to see us late last fall to talk to us about this idea of realistic military training here in Bastrop County. They followed up that with a formal meeting with the Commissioners Court in January of this year, which was a posted meeting, a public meeting. And at that time, the County Commissioners Court voted to welcome them to Bastrop County for this R&T. Let me read a couple of more questions. And where are you, Mr. Blake? Why don't you get the gentleman in the black shirt back there, and let me read this question. This is from a business owner here in Bastrop County. I won't name his business, but I'm sure others feel the same way. I'm concerned that this will scare our guests away, since they will stay with us for peace and quiet. Is this going to be noisy and disruptive operation that will scare anyone away from Bastrop County who might be coming here for peace and quiet?
There will be very little noise associated with it, and that which does take place will be on private land. The area selected is remote, and it's a vast amount of acreage, so it will not negatively impact people's livelihoods or businesses.
Thank you. Additional questions, please state your name.
Yeah, I'm Michael Dill, Bastrop. Just a question, maybe in future reference, none of the public ever seems to be invited to help make decisions on things that are brought into the county of Bastrop or anywhere, it seems, until way after the fact, and we can never go back to maybe have our own vote or say whether something can be put in place and all kinds of things. So how are we going to be able to get out to to the community things are going to be happening and be able to vote on them before they're actually put in place and no longer have a say before we can do anything. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'd be happy if you try to answer that from your perspective, and I'll briefly answer.
I mean, kind of both of y'all.
So I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking. You want to have a vote in what the private landowner uses his land for?
Well, I mean, no, I mean, like, instead of this happening like it is right now, we could have known instead of it being like this right now, we could have known way prior that Jade Helm would be a program that may or may not be coming to Bastrop and have a vote and a citizen vote on whether we do or do not want that to happen, and be given proper information to make that decision instead of a short 5 or 10 minute reading and then mostly questions, which are all going to be mostly negative because they don't know what's really going on.
Which is,
and that's like from like no respectfully that you come to the commission and ask, but not us.
Thank you, Mr. Deal, for your question. In addition to the perspective of the military trainers, I will say that we take seriously this commissioner's court does our representative democracy form of government. And we are asked from week to week, and those of you who said on the earlier meeting and I heard and saw how we go through the agenda and consider the items that are brought to our attention, ask many questions, some of them difficult, perhaps negative questions, and then we make the best decision we can representing our constituents in this county. And when we heard about this, when the presentation was made to us, there was no reason for me or for any of these commissioners to propose that we go out to maybe a referendum vote on this proposal.
Is Bastrop County going to be like gaining profits from this exercise in the long run?
Part of our consideration was the potential economic benefit to businesses in Bastrop County who will gain from these 60 or so individuals that will be in town for a while. But that's the process, and I appreciate you asking. And I hope you understand that we make many decisions, weighty decisions here every 2 weeks when we meet. Another question from downstairs has to do with, and I appreciate Commissioner Pena's perspective on military history. Their comment is that the last time they remember something like this had to do with World War II, and they even talk about rounding up Japanese Americans and interring them in camps. Will Jade Helm infringe on anybody's personal civil rights?
no, we're here to preserve that. Again, that's what we've taken an oath to for, the Constitution.
So did the
It
president.
spans administrations, and the institution has been around for 240 years. We're here to protect all people. Those who cannot protect themselves, those who can, young, old, no matter race, religion, creed, anything like that. That's what your Army does for you. And that's why we all wear the same name tag, U.S. Army.
All right. Let me give you this question. Mr. Becker, where are you?
Over here.
Let's go over to
Over
the
here.
side. The gentleman on the third row on the far right, and then we'll come back to the gentleman in the black shirt on the second row. While we're going there. I'm not seeing every hand, so be patient. We will get to you as soon as we can, including those in the middle. So this question goes back to just the common sense of this idea about blending in a foreign country. And the comment is you're going to stick out like a sore thumb if you walk around with paint on your faces. So how will the training be recognized by the citizens? Will there be any interaction there? And how will we know that it's special military officer in town to be trained, or will we know? Is this going to be covert?
Well, a lot of the honor is going to take place on private land or private property. So that's going to really negate out a lot of that. But if somebody's transported from point A to point B, and they are actually going through the exercise. They will have an orange type mark.
So it really isn't a covert operation. We're not trying to hide anything from the public. Everybody who's here, they have an identification on their arm.
For the personnel going through the training, they will exercise support personnel. So if I'm out here and I just want to check on the training, I'll just be wearing something like this. And then some of the guys that, like I said, going through the training who are out on the private land, they're just going to want to keep their signature low, and that's it.
One more question before I get to this one. Are you planning on detaining or rounding up any American citizens?
No, that's against the law.
And are you planning on knocking on any citizens' doors?
No, we shouldn't have to. Now, let me caveat that with some RTs.
And he said all private.
So, we would give proper notification. Okay? So if you wouldn't mind, we would give proper notification. In this case, with this RMT, we don't have to go knock door to door. If we're in a more built-up area where there were more neighbors, I would go with a local law enforcement officer and go knock door to door and say, hey, during this period of darkness, there may be a helicopter that comes in over this field over here. Those are the only time we go knock door to door, and that's to put out information. And we do that in conjunction with a local law enforcement officer. That will not occur or should not have to occur here in Bastrop. If it does, then we come back to the county court's commission.
Thank you for that explanation. Yes, sir. Name, please.
My name is Rob Stewart, U.S. Army veteran.
Thank you.
The question I have, and I just need to be clear on this. Now, you're going to have plainclothes people that are going to be blending in, right?
On private property.
On private property. What do you got a bunch of people out there that are acting like they don't know that they're blending in or something, or?
It's part of the AAR process. So you're in the military.
Yeah.
You know, they go back and they come in and say, hey, look, you did X, Y, and Z okay, but you didn't blend in well. Why didn't you blend in well? You've known that you would have to go do this for a couple of months. You should have studied the area, say Eastern Europe, and look at how they dress and take in their mannerisms. And you should have prepared for that.
Okay, so you can guarantee us that I won't have to worry about the guy standing next to me being some kind of covert operation, got gathering information that they'll come in later and pick everybody up?
No, that's
okay.
Thank you for your question. The gentleman here in the second row, black shirt.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
Everybody really, truly wants this to be something that it's not, and they're not embracing it. They really want this to be a greater conspiracy. In reality, all we want to do is make sure that our guys are trained for combat overseas. That's it.
The same kind of excuses Hitler used to take over Germany, too.
Let me ask a couple questions from the folks downstairs while we're moving the microphone to this gentleman. Is this kind of training something that can be done to help secure our southern border?
We would train to do it.
Maybe go to the president for that one.
But we should go to National Guard first.
Texas governor can't secure the border.
You mentioned the history of the training and 25-year history of RTC. Yes, sir. Has any civilian been hurt or killed during any of these training exercises?
No.
Yes, sir. Please stand.
Okay, so Robin Sage is a capstone training event. Okay, we will talk about Robin Sage.
Someone was killed there, sir.
Yes, and it was a soon-to-be Green Beret was shot and killed by a sheriff's deputy, who the sheriff's deputy did not know that the exercise was taking place. Robin Sage is a program of record that has been in place for over 50 years in the central Piedmont of North Carolina and into the mountains of North Carolina. Unfortunately, about 8 years ago, the notification went out, but it was not passed down to every person that it should have made its way to. There was an altercation that took place. The soon-to-be Green Beret thought it was part of the exercise scenario. The deputy sheriff had no idea what was going on, and the deputy sheriff shot and killed the soon-to-be Green Beret. Additional control measures were put in place, but again, the RMT process has also been in place for 25 years. That's why we coordinate with local officials and and local law enforcement with that.
You use the term soon-to-be Green Beret. Does that mean that this individual was not in the military?
He was in the military. They were going through their capstone training event.
So he was not a citizen or a civilian. And he's not a civilian. He was a military
trainee that was shot and killed. In the exercise would have culminated in about 2 weeks. They would have moved over to the auditorium and they would have donned their Green Berets.
Very unfortunate circumstance. Your question, sir, please state your name.
My name is James Gillum. I'm a district director with the Texas Nationalist Movement. I'm also a former veteran. I want to thank you for your service, Colonel. My question has to do, you mentioned earlier upholding the Constitution, which is also the oath that I took. That being said, the Constitution calls for the defense of the United States. Wouldn't the money be better spent that is being used on Jade Helm, since it's in such a wide area that you're doing, Texas, Arizona, Utah,
Florida, California.
Wouldn't that be better spent defending the southern border of the United States?
Is above his pay grade. So I won't ask him to answer that, but thank you for your, I want to answer the question.
It's a matter of national policy, so you should take it to the national level leadership. You're concerned.
It's not a question to be asked. Ms. Sue Long, please take her to the microphone. Someone downstairs has written this question. If you find in your operations here dangerous people or areas that may be dangerous, will you take control of them, that is, of these situations?
If there is something that you would notice as a good Samaritan yourself, say someone getting beat down on the highway, we would probably stop and just do the proper thing and take that under control, and then call local law enforcement and let them handle it. But good Samaritan is what we would do at that point in time.
All right. One follow-up question and then Ms. Long. I would like to be a volunteer as a lifelong resident of Bastrop County to be a part of this exercise. It would be a privilege and an honor for me to do so. Is there an opportunity for me to volunteer?
We have had a lot of people come forward and want to volunteer as role players. We're not really set up for that. We have had other people, to include just 3 days ago, volunteer large swaths of acreage. Up to 1,400 acres was the most recent. Those usually come in, we look at them, we vet them, and we talk with them and explain everything up front. But there is room. This thing's really getting wired in tight at this point in time, so to add anything more onto it probably isn't going to happen.
Okay, good. Ms. Long?
My name is Sue Long. I'm just curious, this private landowner, how did they know to come to you to volunteer? I just haven't heard about this until the last week, and maybe I'm just in the dark somewhere, but there must be a way for them to have learned about this.
It's word of mouth, so it usually starts with a veteran who understands the R&T process and knows what we want to achieve through our training events to get our guys ready for overseas deployments. And then from there it spreads and they say, hey, I know someone else over here. It's truly word of mouth.
Interesting.
Thank you, Ms. Long. Question about the water. With Bastrop shortage of water, where are you going to get 500 gallons of water at a time? That's just
5,000 gallons.
Yeah, so there is Camp Swift. Some of the exercise will take place on Camp Swift, and the water is provided to the military through means on Camp Swift. We use those things that are available to us.
Okay, Mr. Dahmer, where are you? Mr. Pfeiffer. Let's get the microphone to Jim. Striped shirt right there in the middle. Go ahead and state your name and ask your question, please.
My name is Daniel Duclue, and I'm a resident of Bastrop, Texas. I grew up here and got a rich family military history, so thank you for your service. You said the Department of Homeland Security was not involved. However, they are a cabinet position. It's under the jurisdiction of the president, and you are also under the jurisdiction of the president. So under the Bush administration, there's a document created which is part of a bigger idea, but it was called Right-Wing Extremism, Current Economic and Political Climate Fueling Resurgent and Radicalization and Recruitment. And I won't get too much into that. However, it talks about gun owners, Christians, veterans, people that believe in the Constitution. In fact, when I look around in this room, a lot of people that are represented in this room are in that document. And so it seems to me that it's maybe kind of a slight conflict of interest that the government would be here in Texas in a place where people believe in the Constitution, where there are a lot of Christians, and if you're not a Christian, you're still allowed to practice your religion, and we respect that. And a lot of people that are proud to be gun owners. And so to see a big military buildup here, to me, I think those kind of people that pay attention and look at the documents the government puts out on right-wing extremism under the Bush administration, but we got a new president that, I'm not going to go any further on that. But so I'm curious, and I'm no George Bush fan, but I'm curious. You said that the Department of Homeland Security wasn't directly involved in this. Are you aware of that document, the right-wing extremism?
No, you have to, one, take up the issue that you have with the Department of Homeland Security on that.
Okay.
Two, when you say, hey, we're all in that category, that really does actually template across, I'd say, 90% of the military, regardless of service. And I'd again have...
So do you find it kind of offensive that the government would potentially label you as a terrorist, sir?
Just to conclude, that's enough.
Okay, and also, according to Mike over here, he was talking about representation, Mr. Poppy. I voted for you, sir, and I respect you. And the people of Bastrop do not want this.
We have lots of other...
Okay.
Come out to the gentleman in the red shirt right here, I think, Mr. Watt.
My name is Tom Watts, I'm a vet, and I have a question. Who's the suit?
Just at the beginning of the meeting, Tom.
Well, his name was given, but not what he does or who he is.
He is in charge of the
operations planner and exercise designer.
One thing I'd like to say about special ops, I spent 20 plus years as a super spook. You know what that is, don't you? If this gets noisy, it's going to be because they did something wrong. It's not their job to be noisy. But I do have another question. You brought up the fact that you believe in supporting the Constitution. Why aren't you doing this job in Washington, D.C., where they don't believe in the Constitution instead of here?
I've been in the Army 27 years. This is my passion. This is the way that I serve my country.
Thank you.
right here.
James Beecher, KBT News. You mentioned that the FBI and other State Departments are going to participate in this practice, and I was wondering if you could give me an example of what specifically they're going to be doing. You mentioned that they used to gather evidence in the field. Well, this is not Iraq or Afghanistan, so what sort of evidence will you be looking for or training them to search for here?
So again, with the State Department, it's all about nation building. So we want to make sure that with the role players that are there representing the forces that we would interact with overseas, what do they need for to establish their government or solidify their government, or do they need something from an offshoot of the State Department, USAID? Okay, maybe there's a medical emergency or a crisis that we don't know about, and then we go back and we feed it back up through the communications chain, and it makes sure that it gets to the right person at the higher headquarters who's representing the State Department or USAID. Vice versa, I said there would be a representative from the FBI working at the higher headquarters on a federal installation in support of this exercise. He will be looking at some of the message traffic that comes back up, and with one of the role players, he may ask, hey, you know, it could be just an inject, and an inject is something that will drive the exercise. They may come back and say, hey, This guy who you've identified as Clark Birkenstein, okay? We really don't think he's Clark Birkenstein. We think he's Helmut Holt. And it just drives the exercise. That's it. That's all they're doing. Making sure that we're training up and down.
So they would only be used for...
You have a follow-up question?
Yes, so they would only be used in a scenario if you're not actually together any sort of...
And they won't even be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Blake, if you'll bring the mic back to this side of the room, the gentleman in the here. We have some other questions that we'll get to. And one's a question for me. Why weren't you prepared for this huge turnout? This is a great country we live in, and social media has added a whole new level of citizen involvement. Frankly, I'm pleasantly surprised to see the public input here and the public interest here. I think I sense that as being a thing that's good for America, good for democracy, and should we ever do this again, we'll know to have this over at the convention center. Just didn't expect quite this much response. But we thank you for being here, and we're trying to accommodate and make everybody as comfortable as possible. I have a couple more here, and then we'll get to this gentleman. So you talked about the terrain and distances. Why are you not utilizing on-base sites for these kinds of things? The last question is for me. Why would the public not go out and vote on this? We've talked about that. Why is it so important to do this off-base?
Again, the realistic military training takes place off the federal installation. We know those installations like the backs of our hands. It's really getting out there and exposing them to new terrain that they're not familiar with, including the road networks that they may have to travel from one point in Texas to another point in Texas.
Yes, sir.
I guess Cameron Minnesota from Dallas. I guess my question is related to that last question about why does it need to be done here. And you had mentioned that these activities have been going on for 25 years. So one of my questions is, I'm curious to know how this one compares in size and scope to the ones that have happened before, and in relation to or in conjunction with that, why now? We've been in the Middle East for 20 years, you know. So why now? And then
What more can you learn?
And then the other thing is I'm a little confused. Am I correct that this activity is going to be going on between the hours of 11 p.m. and 2 or 3 or 4?
24 hours a day.
Okay. Well, because I guess I'm confused because you keep saying that it has to do with allowing interaction with the civilians by letting your guys blend in. But then we keep talking about how we're not going to see them. And so I can't understand. When I think of special ops, I mean, again, I'm a layman. I'm pretty
Don't be too editorial. Your question,
really
you actually asked 2 questions. Let him answer those questions.
Well, but my thought is that special ops, late at night, blending in. You mentioned searching for bombs that had been given to children.
No, that was an example.
Right, but I mean, an example of my understanding was of what they're going to be training for over here. I'm just very confused as to.
Yeah. So, and that's what I talked about earlier on. 14 years of combat still going on. We've been exercising 2 of the core tasks associated with that. There are at least 20 other core tasks that we need to train on that we have not been able to because of the high op tempo. Things are kind of slowing down a little bit, and we need to get back to the basics, back to the fundamentals. Some of these tasks the guys have not trained on since they went through the Special Forces qualification course. You had another question within there.
Well, I mean, I guess you mentioned why now, but I guess I'm still confused as to the whole blending in. I don't understand. First of all, the one question was how's it related size and scope to the previous ones?
Okay, so
I mean, this to me seems like a broad, coordinated event over multiple states.
Correct.
But again, why now? What are we planning for? What are we anticipating for in the future?
Future operations overseas.
We're in trouble, man.
Yeah.
If we're going to increase what we're already doing.
Let's break this this down. We've already fought the last 14 years, okay? Special Operations Forces look toward the future. All right, so in order to do that, we know how to fight what we've been going through the last 14 years. We've pretty much mastered that, okay? We've been neglecting, because of the op-tempo, our other skill sets. We have to make sure that we maintain the edge on those skill sets, because we may be called upon them to be used in the future. You don't want to have a skill and then forget how to use it when you're called upon, or say, hey, hold on, I need 9 months to train up on that. Your special operations, you need to have that in your hip pocket right away.
Thank you. The gentleman behind the camera there, like, if you can, microphone him while you're going there. Here's a question, and I'm not sure I understand the language. How do you reconcile this with the training videos of U.S. Marines training for riot control involving sovereign citizens? Is there anything there?
One, I'm not aware of that training. I can speak for United States Army Special Operations Command, so to ask me a question about the Marine Corps and then for me to answer would be irresponsible at best.
But you're not training the Army in riot control involving sovereign citizens?
No, sir, we're not.
Hi, everyone. Well, of course, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Jade Helm. I think it's important because, you know, we keep looking at this thing from every possible angle, and I want to say up front here, it's really important for you to understand this. We don't know exactly what's going on. The only people that know that, not even the troops know that, not even the Special Operations Command people on the lower levels, really up through probably the lower field grade officers don't know what's going on. This is the real objective of this thing, or objectives, are really hidden from the operators and the soldiers. They really don't know. Okay, the problem is a lot larger than them, but of course they're the means by which this thing is carried out. I just want to mention a couple of things. The first is, as I said, we really don't know what's going on. I can't say definitively that this is a psyop against the American people, no matter whether it's training for a foreign war or for that and or some type of domestic operation, picking up dissidents, taking over state legislatures, you know, whatever. There was a Colonel Benson that actually came up with a plan like that in the Army War College. Some of you are probably aware of that. The point is we don't know, and we need to be prepared. But I want to make the point this way, that no matter what happens, whether a false flag is used, maybe you know, they're going to say that Al-Qaeda or ISIS or some operating cell in the U.S., or many of them are going to do something during the time period of Jade Helm, and then, oh, lo and behold, we're already out ready for this because we have soldiers in the field and a drill, and gee, we need to do this all the time, so we'll always be ready. However they fashion it, let me assure you that the United States is the prize, to take down liberties in the United States. That's a #1 goal, and I hope that you all understand that by now. So regardless of how they orchestrate this, the end game is still going to be the same. Pretend to save the American people and at the same time put them under some type of subjugation, okay? Take away your bank accounts, change, you know, the economic situation, you know, grab political dissidents. You know, you don't have to be violent and just disagree with the status quo, you know, whatever. The point is that any number of things can be used. And I hope that you understand that all of these things that we've been talking about as far as, you know, terrorism and the definitions of it, and really the many, many, many definitions now. I think there are more than scores. There are probably hundreds of different definitions now. It's expanded so far that everything, whenever you merely disagree, you're labeled a terrorist. Or not even disagree, you just happen to have a lifestyle they don't like, you know, whatever. So regardless of how it plays out, okay, whether an attack occurs during the drill, which could be a false flag, or whether they're provocateuring an attack, which the drill's just going to be, you know, luckily going on so that they can counter it, or whatever, okay, the end game is still the same. Reduction of liberties, really putting people into slavery. That would be here domestically. Now, you know how I feel about the military and our empire building around the world. You know, this is wrong, you know, as I've said before. It's wrong that we are engaged in these things and causing the murder and mayhem of hundreds of thousands of people, even millions around the world at this point, with all the things we've been doing in Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, on and on and on. And now, of course, we're trying to move on Russia and Iran. However you feel about those countries, there were other ways to handle this without this military option. And really, it's not an option. This was the intent all along, anyway, by the military-industrial complex, the weapons makers, money banks, all of those. So just the bottom line is just be aware, get prepared, and no matter what comes down the line, stand by your constitutional rights, your God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Stand by those and do not forfeit them, do not forsake them. Do everything you can to retain those for yourself and for your fellow Americans, indeed, fellow mankind, okay? Now, I want to show you another thing that I've looked at here, and I want to assure you that even if this is anywhere near the truth about what all this is really about, the Jade Helm exercise, which I doubt, at least not entirely, it is another possibility. And I also want you to know that even with this possibility, it's wrong. It's the wrong thing to do because we would be the aggressors. Let me show you this map. This comes out of Sputnik News in Russia. And I want you to see it because this should have been the map overlay, what we call in the military map overlay. You use an existing geographical area, topographical area, whatever. And you usually don't call it by the names there. You come up with some other names, and those map overlays go over there and show intermediate objectives, rallying points, airfields, whatever. Let me show you this map that Sputnik News came up with, and I'll explain it.
Here is the Sputnik News article. Again, Sputnik is the state propaganda arm of the Russian government. And again, the name of the article. Now, here is the map according to the Russian news agency Sputnik. And you can bet that they had the Russian Defense Ministry with some information on this. And now, the important thing to recognize here are really two things. I think I've already mentioned it. The first is that it's not just the American conservatives that are worried about what they're seeing here. The Russians are too, so they know that it's bad either way. Now, one of my earlier videos, or at least maybe I didn't say it, I think it was in a response to someone, I talked about a map overlay. And this is what I would expect to see, a map overlay. In these map overlays, and there are several of them in an operations plan, then an operations order, that even for exercise purposes, that would take a normal piece of terrain and overlay pretend sites, places, things like that on the normal terrain. And this is what I would expect to see. So the Russians probably have it right. On that map overlay, you would have things like, the objectives and those types of things. Not really any specific information because that would be in the operations order. But at any rate, this is important because this is kind of how the Middle East is laid out. And if we were to go to war in the Middle East, heaven forbid, by the way, I think this is demonic, okay? I just want you to know, I think this is demonic. And I'm going to also include a link down below on some things that some of our founding fathers talked about how dangerous these things are that we're engaged in. But at any rate, this would provide a training ground very large, very similar to the terrain and the distances involved in a major regional war. So you'd have escape and evasion, you'd have, all kinds of operations you could do in something like this. But is it correct to do it in the United States around citizens, endangering them, and getting them used to militarization? This is what you see, as one other commentator said, in third world countries, a banana republic. We've given the military plenty of money, more than enough money, to conduct these operations on military installations. And if they want large distances, well, okay, I can understand that. Back when I was in the Army, we did large movements of troops, convoys from one place to another. One that I recall was from Fort Ord, California, all the way to 29 Palms, which was quite a distance. So I understand these types of things, but it's the manner. I've got to really impress that upon everyone. It's the manner in which the military, the government of the United States, and the Department of Defense and the Special Operations Command foisted this other map that shows Texas as hostile and Utah as hostile on the American people, and the way it was done. So really, they do, I think, obviously consider the American people, at least a number of them, to be opposing their purposes, and they should, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. But at least on this map you can see that the Russians, who I don't normally consider to be a paranoid people, realize that something's going on here. So what am I saying? This is probably a dual purpose mission. As one writer into the site mentioned, it's legal now to conduct psychological operations, propaganda, disinformation on the American people, whether or not it's constitutional or moral. And that was the point in my video. It may be legal, but it's not constitutional, it's not moral. And a free republic, constitutional republic, cannot exist with an electorate that is not informed, correctly informed. And secrecy and deceit destroy liberty. So I wanted to show you this. Go to Sputnik and look at it, and you'll see how they look at it. And again, I want to emphasize, this is a dual purpose mission. It's quite obvious. Yes, they could be preparing for a huge, unjust, unrighteous war in the Middle East and other places, of course, if you've been watching this. But also, it has the second objective of, just like it says, winning the hearts and minds of the people. The military going in and using these same tactics on American people, mayors, city councils, citizens, etc. And it actually says that in some of the other documents. You just have to know what you're reading. Anyway, let me move to this other thing.
Okay, so as you can see here, that's not bad, really. A large area, Special Operations Forces in particular. Well, really any military would have to, practice escape and evasion, land navigation, planning and attacking objectives, whatever, certainly. And over a wide area like that, gee, that sounds really good, doesn't it? To be able to do that, to mimic this type of thing. But there are two problems. The first is we shouldn't be doing this in the first place because we are the aggressors in Eastern Europe and in Southwest Asia. That's just the situation. We're not defending ourselves. We're forcing other people to risk their lives and their well-being to try to stop this takeover of their world by us, by the United States. Okay, so that's wrong. We're not there protecting anybody. We're not exporting democracy. We're causing more murder and mayhem and destabilization and suffering. Okay, so that in itself is wrong. The other aspect of this is that even if that's what they're training for here in the United States, you don't do it by engaging in what they are doing, and that is a psychological operation to get people prepared to accept this constant military presence. This is bad, because then you really don't have any control. Who do you go to if somebody takes you off the street late at night or uses the NDAA to come and pick you up at your house at 3 a.m. in the morning? Where do you go for help? You can't. So you have to keep that in mind, okay? Those are things that are absolutely necessary to consider. The point being, of course, that when your rights are suspended, you have no recourse, okay? The military and the DOD and the feds are denying any plans to institute martial law. Well, do you really think they're going to tell you if that's what they're going to do? They're not going to tell you that. Everything is secret. Remember, everything's in secrecy, and surprise is one of the principles of war, okay? You keep the enemy guessing, and you choose the time and the place. I hope you understand that. So the propaganda, the disinformation, all of that, will play for them on the surprise of how the thing is actually executed. Is everybody in the military bad? No, I'm not saying that. But like I mentioned in Valkyrie, at least I think I mentioned it about Valkyrie, if you remember, the German army or reserve army was fooled there. You know, they didn't know who they were working for. And that happens in real life, okay? And especially when did you read here lately, the Army's going to reduce its, or the military is going to reduce its recruitment standards. Oh my gosh, you know? I mean, first of all, I understand that PSYOP and understand what they're after there, and that's bad enough. A healthy distrust of the central government is a center plank of a constitutional republic. We don't need to worship our military. We can respect the fact that they're needed, that it's a necessary evil, and appreciate the sacrifices of those who truly, truly sacrifice for our freedoms, our liberty, the lives of our loved ones, etc. But don't be fooled. Just being in the military is not in and of itself honorable. Not if you do dishonorable things.